All right. I'm going to start this off. Our topic is the Munich Massacre. In September 5th, 1972, the Munich Olympics televised to a larger audience than had ever seen an Olympics by an exponential factor. Over a billion eyeballs would be on the screens watching this. And a terrorist group called Black September sent 8 members who broke into the Israeli living quarters in the Olympic Village. They kidnapped 11 with the idea of hostage for prisoner exchange, among other things. And in the course of the kidnappings, 2 of the Israeli athletes were killed. They would kill the other 9 in an airport firefight. And so 11 would die, and 5 of the 8 terrorists would also die. It's a terrible event. But before I began researching this, I almost said to myself, why did I pick this topic? Because does it have historical resonance? Eyeballs mean something. That amplifies how we feel about something. And so the fact that a billion eyeballs were watching this, the coverage of this live, means that it impacted our lives, or at least our emotions, our emotional lives. But did it mean something beyond that? If all it was, well, this is a terrorist act, or this was an anti-Semitic attack. My God, our history is rife with those examples. Why does this one stand out? I mean, you could go back to as far back as the Inquisition. You could go back to the Dreyfus Affair. You could go to the Holocaust and say, yeah, virulent anti-Semitism has been a factor in the lives of Western peoples for millennia. Okay, that having been said, I wasn't sure I had made a good choice here. But I have come around, and I'm going to make a statement that may sound absurdly overstated. And be patient. Hopefully I will make it clear why I'm saying this. I think this kidnapping and murdering of 11 Israeli athletes is one of the most important, one of the most significant political acts in the second half of the 20th century. Now, that seems a kind of a strange, overblown thing to say. It is not important because 11 people died. It's tragic because 11 people died. Its importance is something different from that. I mean, there are lots of events that are tragic and that lots of people eyeballs view. We could go back to, say, the OJ trial, which had eyes on it for weeks and weeks and weeks. Okay. Ultimately, the OJ trial would be interesting, and you could learn some things about the cultural appetites of Americans and some things that are worth learning. But do I think it's an important historical event? I don't. Because one of the things I define as an important historical event is, does it alter the course of history in some way? And I don't think the OJ trial does, as many eyeballs as watched it. This one does. And so I want to give you some examples of events that are important because they change history. One of the obvious ones is Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor isn't historically significant because of the tragedy of lost American sailors' lives and ships sunk into the ocean. It's important because it drew America into World War II, which completely altered the course of that war, and that altered the course of all the subsequent history. I think an event is important if it changes things, if it changes the direction of history in some way. And I think this event does. But I could give you another example. Hiroshima. Hiroshima is maybe the most horrifying, tragic event of the 20th century. But being an atrocity is not by itself make something important. It opened up the atomic age and the consequences. And that's really my point. It is not the event, but the consequences that follow from the event that give that event its historical significance. Again, we could go back to the murder of the Archduke, Franz Ferdinand. Who the hell is Franz Ferdinand? And why do we care that he died? I know nothing about him, but I do know that his death through a whole series of entanglements caused the conflagration of World War I, which marked the 21st century, which caused a rift between the 20th century and the 19th century that preceded it. That changed the nature of warfare. I used to tell my students when I was teaching, and we would read the book Farewell to Arms, the largest war in the 19th century, measured in terms of casualties, was the Franco-Prussian War, with 250,000 casualties. The low guesstimate for World War I is 20 million. That's a world of difference. Second difference, World War I was the first war in which more civilians were killed than soldiers. And that has been the history of warfare ever since. Whether you go to Korea, whether you go to Vietnam, whether you go to the wars in Iraq, whether you go to the current struggle in Gaza, more civilians will die. It is a collective decision among nations that go to war that attacking the civilian population will break the will of the people, and that is an enormous change. So when I am talking about an event being important, I want it to really make a change in something essential in our world. So I'm going to make a statement here, and you may agree or disagree with it, but it's a conclusion that I came to. On September 5th, 1972, 11 Olympic athletes were killed by the terrorist group Black September. On September 6th, the war on terror was officially declared. Now, for most of us in my age group, that's important. But I'm looking at Keith here. The war on terror has been one of the central realities of his lifetime. I mean, he doesn't really have the Cold War experience that we have, but he does have the experience of the war on terror. And I believe that it really does begin on September 6th. So September 5th is a thing that happened. 5th is a thing that happened. September 6th is the response that will lead to the consequences of the war on terror. I mean, what is really going to happen in terms of Israel is Israel's priorities from 1948 to 1972, their intelligence priorities were, look at their Arab neighbors. Were they planning to go to war? What was going on there? That was where their central focus was. 1972, prior to Munich, had seen a rise in terrorism, whether it's from hijackings, whether it's from letter bombings, whether it's from assassinations of embassy officials, diplomats, all around the globe, as far afloat as Thailand. But after Munich, on September 6th, Golda Meir will call a meeting of her cabinet and of her intelligence services experts and say, the real threat to Israel is from terrorism. Your central focus now must be on the terrorist groups around the globe and their activities. That doesn't mean that they ignore what the Egyptians are doing, what the Syrians are doing. It means priority number one is the war on terror. And that is a big change. And we will find ourselves after 9/11 in that same war. But I believe it started September 6th. And that's the reason I make the statement. This is an important event because we now have we almost hesitate to get into wars with nations. But wars with terrorist groups, whether they're fought with drones or however they are fought, that now is one of the central mechanisms for warfare in the modern world. And I am arbitrarily, perhaps, but I am saying that the events of September 5th, 1972 were the triggering event for that change. That makes it important. O.J. Simpson trial was a nice soap opera to watch, and it's a demeaning term. I understand that. So for those of you who think more of it, that's fine. But this is an event that changes history, and that's what I think makes it important. The 11 dead is tragedy. The consequences of the world turning to war on terror is a history-altering reality. And so that is where I am. Okay. The story is going to be complicated. It's going to be in two parts. One is we're going to find out what happened and why it happened and how it happened. Part two is almost the more important part. Part two is, what was the response? And that's where world history makes its change. I also want to say something as a kind of a footnote. I've told you that next year I'm planning on doing histories of the Middle East, just to try and understand the world prior to where we are now, thinking of the late 19th century through 1948. One of the things that is a reality is the minute we begin to get into discussions that revolve around the Middle East, in particular the Arab-Israeli conflicts, there are people of enormously strong opinions on one side and on the other. And there are people in the middle who are trying to figure out, how do you put those puzzle pieces together, and not being able to find a way. So, I mean, this is a great group, and I truly believe that we can have these discussions and we can disagree with each other, but there will be moments where our emotions will be lit, because these things matter in a very profound way to many of us. And so I put that in there. Okay. I'm going to start off with a kind of a weird way. What did the Germans, as they were preparing for Munich, how did they brand the Olympics? They called them the Olympics of peace and joy. And obviously we know what happened. They didn't turn out to be the Olympics of peace and joy. But that branding is an important part of this story. And the reason is, West Germany, this is before Germanies are united. West Germany wanted to erase the memories, or at least have them fade as much as possible, the memories of Nazism and the horrors perpetrated on the Jews of Europe. The last time the Olympics had been held in Germany were the Berlin Olympics of 1936, which were, in their own way, a travesty. They wanted these Olympics to be anything but that. And one of the ironic outcomes of that is they did not want to have a security presence visible. They did not want this to seem like militaristic Germany. They wanted it to seem open and friendly, and that this was, and they wanted the Israeli delegation, the largest in Israeli history, to play a central role in the opening ceremonies and to be paraded throughout, because they wanted to make the point, we are now the Germany where a Jewish delegation from Israel can come to Germany and feel safe, and feel that the threats that had existed, the hatred and the murderous actions of the Nazis were a part of a different Germany that no longer existed. And so they did not have armed policemen there. They didn't have patrols armed walking through the village, making sure things were safe. They made it as easy as possible for a terrorist group like Black September to walk in and do what they did. As a matter of fact, I will even precede that. In Cologne Airport, about 3 weeks before the Olympics, a couple carrying 4 suitcases were stopped because something seemed not quite right. Okay, and they were told to open their bags. The man in the couple started screaming and complaining and and just making a whole lot of noise. And they said, fine, open one bag. They opened one bag. It was full of lingerie and clothes. All right, you can go through. The other 3 bags contained 10 AK-47s, 14 grenades, dozens of magazines of ammunition, and some other weapons. And these would be the weapons that the group from Black September would use. In another day, they would have said, open all 4. But they did not want to seem like they were being like the Germans of an earlier age. Now, this couple that were doing it, they were mules. They didn't even know what was in the bags. They were paid to carry these bags through, and they did. They left them in a locker at a hotel. The 8 terrorists went, had the keys, and opened up the lockers and had their munitions. That's how they got the arms that enabled them to do that. So the whole point is Germany wanted to make this a friendly experience with no sense of danger or militarism in there at all. These are the Olympics of peace and joy, and the Jews of Israel are welcome here. And that's going to be obviously a terrible, terrible problem as a result of that. Okay, we already pretty much know what happened, and most of us, sorry for you guys who are too young.
I remember. I was 10. I remember.
Okay. Watched it on TV. Jim McKay doing the kind of headline reporting. At about 4 o'clock, between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, they showed up. First off, Israel, the Israeli delegation was on the first floor. The door to that apartment complex was never locked because it was an open door for athletes from every floor to go on up. And it also led to the parking lot. So it was never locked. Again, you're making things so easy. There's a coach for the Israelis. His name is Dr. Shmuel Lalkin. And because of his military experience also, he looked at this and said, this isn't safe. So he called the German Olympic authorities and said, we want to have, I think we should talk about moving the Israeli delegation to another location, to a higher location, to a safer location, and having a security force there. And they basically told him, let me see, you're a coach. Why don't you coach? We have already discussed these matters with Israeli security people. We're happy with what it is. We don't need your input. So he went further. He called the Israeli security officials and they said, you're a coach. Why don't you coach? We got things under control. Let it go. Well, he was right. And they got in, and in the struggle, they killed 2 of the men. Some of the Israelis in the other apartments, they occupied 5 different apartments. 2 of them were apartments that were where the athletes were kidnapped. Were calling for police help. The first police to arrive were unarmed because nobody was armed because this was not a militaristic operation. This was a friendly Olympics of peace and joy. And again, I want you to understand that the world has changed. In 1972, Germany did not have a hostage negotiating team. They didn't feel the need for one. And they did not know. They were, one of the stories we're going to tell here is about German incompetence, but they were just unprepared for this change in the world. And so they called Israel. And Israel said, here are the rules. No negotiations. We don't negotiate with terrorists. And they said, I'll tell you what, why don't you let us send in a commando team? We'll take care of it. And Germany clearly and obviously said, absolutely not. This is German soil. No commando team from any other nation, Israel or anyone, is coming in for a police action in our state, in our country. But I want to give you an example of what is going to be the difference between how Israel was able to handle something, how the Germans were unable to handle that. In the German plan, they pretended to negotiate and they were willing to fly in helicopter the hostages and the terrorists to the airport where they said they would board a plane to Cairo. That was all a lie, but that's beside the point. Just 2 months earlier, 3 months earlier, a Palestinian terrorist group had hijacked a plane that had about 70 Israeli citizens on it. There were 90 people on the plane. The bulk of them were Israeli. The Israelis handled it very, very quickly and efficiently. They pretended to negotiate. They lined up snipers and marksmen around, and they gave the signal. And in 90 seconds, every terrorist was dead. One of the hostages was hit by a stray bullet, and he died. but all the other hostages, the 89 others, came out of it alive, and it took 90 seconds. That's what they wanted to do here. Okay. And I do not fault the Germans here. You do not let another nation come in for a police action in your country. That's just something that no nation would consider. Okay. Here's how the Germans decided to handle it. They agreed that they would fly them in helicopters to the airport, and they had a three-pronged ambush plan. One, they were going to have a plane there, and the plane was there to go to Cairo. No, it wasn't, but it's there. Stupidly, they filled the tank of the plane, so any stray bullet could have set off an explosion. That tank should have been empty. I mean, but that's one mistake. Okay. On board, they were to have a crew dressed in uniforms as if they were flight crew, but they were really German cops who they assumed when the hostages and terrorists first arrived, the leaders of the terrorists would want to go on board the ship and inspect it to make sure there was nothing funny going on. On board, that crew would take down those one or two leaders, subdue them, tie them up, or kill them if necessary. Then they would have marksmen around to take out the other terrorists. That was the plan. Oh, and they would have an armor car division coming in to support and protect them. What could go wrong? Try everything. First off, the marksmen had no communication devices, so they couldn't coordinate their activities. That seems, rule number one to follow. Okay. Number two, while the helicopters were on their way to the airport, the crew inside the plane decided this was a suicide mission. We're not doing this. And they abandoned the plane. And they never told anyone. It almost seems unbelievable. I mean, I see the expression on your face, Gary. It seems unbelievable. They walked away. They were not there when the helicopters with the terrorists and hostage arrived. 3 or 4, whatever number I'm at. They forgot to call the armor car division to come in. 20 minutes into the firefight at the airport, they said, oh, we got to call them. Well, they got there about an hour later because streets, with all the media and everything going on, streets were clogged. They got there after the firefight was over. 4, their marksmen weren't marksmen. They were local police. They asked them, can you shoot? Yeah, we practiced on the range. They had no training. They had never been snipers. And they had been on duty for 15 hours and were exhausted. If you're looking for anything to go wrong, you got all the elements right there. So the marksmen are ordered to fire on the first 2 terrorists. They hit one, miss the other. There's a firefight going on. One of the terrorists takes a grenade because the hostages are still in the 2 helicopters. Throw a grenade into the helicopter. That wipes out half of the hostages. Another terrorist goes over with his machine gun and cleans out the other group of terrorists, of hostages, who are tied up in there. So they obviously can't escape on their own. They're not only tied up, they're tied together. And so all of the hostages are dead. Ultimately, they kill 5 of the terrorists and 3 of them survive. Those 3 are tried in a German court and put in jail. Israel is furious. This was botched as badly as it could have been botched. But it was what it was. Okay. Then comes what the Israelis call the German capitulation. About 3 years later, there is a hijacking of a Lufthansa plane by members of Black September. They negotiate with the German authorities, and I'm exaggerating only slightly, and 5 minutes later, the Germans agreed to the request, which was, give us the 3 men who survived the Munich Massacre and put them on a plane to Algeria. And the Germans did that. Israel was pulling out its hair. Well, these are in Israel, however much we thought about the Munich Massacre because we had to watch it on TV, in Israel, their emotions were about 1,000-fold much higher, much greater, much more intense than ours. And the idea that these men were being let go. But that's only half the story. Information has come out, not 100% proved, but suggesting that it wasn't a hijacking. That German officials had cooperated with Black September to stage a hijacking where the hijackers would demand the prisoners because Germany was getting terrorist threats. As long as you have those prisoners there, we see you as an enemy to Palestinian rights, and we are going to make Germany pay for it. Well, they wanted those hostages out. They wanted that threat removed. And so, again, it's not a 100% proven fact that it was a staged hijacking. I kind of think it was, but I'm letting you know, nobody has made it a definitive proof. But it was clear that Germany was glad to be rid of the problem because it was a problem for them. And again, the world was not yet prepared. How do we handle terror? And Germany was frightened, as they could reasonably and should reasonably be. And so they cooperated with the terrorists. And again, I'm making a strong distinction here. The Israeli position has been, you do not negotiate with terrorists. You just don't. And the Germans understood these things differently. Now, I want to look a little bit at the other side. First off, who was Black September? And the ironic thing, not odd, I guess, is they were a splinter group of the PLO, and their primary target was not Israel. Their name, Black September, comes from events in Jordan. After the 48 war and after the various Arab-Israeli wars where there were refugees who were looking for a place to exist, most of them went to Jordan. In fact, 60% of Jordan's population at this time is Palestinian refugees. And they were causing havoc, and King Hussein wanted them out. And so one September, Black September, if you will, he sent his army into the refugee camps, and they killed literally thousands of these refugees. And the others fled into Beirut, and Beirut became the new headquarters for the various refugees and terrorist groups. But they were out of Jordan. But Black September's main function as they began was, we want to bring down King Hussein and kill him if we can for what he did. That was their main target.
There's an end game to the story of the three who were released by Germany.
Yes.
Mossad went after them quietly and killed all three of them one at a time.
Killed two of them.
Oh, is that right?
One of them.
Oh.
There's a documentary called One Day in September, and his name is Al Jassay or some name like that. Oops, here comes my daughter. Hold on a second. And he's one of the people interviewed. Mossad thought he had died, but he did not.
Really?
Yes. Now, as he was interviewed, obviously cloaked and voice changed and all of that. But yeah. No, he was one of them survived the assassination attempts.
That's new information to me, but thank you.
Yeah, but look up the documentary One Day in September. It was an Academy Award winning.
I've got that. It's very good.
Yeah.
But didn't they also go after the people who masterminded
Yes,
the attack. They went after everyone.
everyone. Yes, that's the second part of this story. Absolutely. But yeah, no, they got almost everybody, and they thought they had everybody, but they missed one. They heard he had died. You know, they knew they didn't kill him, but they heard he had died, and you can see him speaking, and obviously this is, I think the documentary was late in the late 90s, made in the late 90s or something like that.
I
But
will look it up as soon as we're all done here.
yeah, you know, I've seen his name spelled 5 different ways, because when they're transliterating Arabic names, they spell them different ways. It's something like Al-Jassay or some name like that. And besides which, any Arabic name that I pronounce, I am probably mispronouncing, and there's just unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to correct that. But yeah, at any rate, their purpose, the question then becomes, what is their purpose in doing this? Well, there were 2 things they wanted to do. One, they demanded, we'll release the hostages, you release 236 prisoners, Arab prisoners, in Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. And of course, Israeli position is no negotiations. The other thing they wanted to do is they wanted to bring the plight of Palestinians to world consciousness. We live in a world in which we are super conscious of that, in which if we start to discuss Gaza, what I guarantee you, if we got a mass of people together, we get a group of people screaming about Israel's rights to defend itself and to preserve its nation. We get another group of people saying there's a genocide going on against the Palestinians. And we get people in the middle who understand that both sides have serious rights and serious wrongs. And how do you fit them all together and all of that? That world is part of the legacy of this Munich attack. There were 1 million eyeballs on this, and then discussions in the aftermath of Palestinian issues became a front burner discussion in a way that it had never been before. Obviously, before 1972, we were not unaware, but it was a minor voice, a low-key voice, with some people commenting on it, some people pleading for them, but the world in general not engaged in that discussion. Beginning in 1972 and in the decades that are going to follow, the number of people who are not just engaged in, but affected by, whose attitudes and ideas have been changed by their readings about Palestinian refugees and the plight of these peoples, have created the world we live in now, in which we are so divided that having discussions is very difficult for lots of people. We think our politics are divided because we hate Trump or we hate the Democrats, or we got nothing on the division and on the intensity of the divisions that exists over Israeli rights versus Palestinian rights. And again, if you want to, and I'm saying this kind of cynically, but kind of honestly, Munich Massacre was very successful, because if their main aim was to bring the question of the Palestinians to the world consciousness, it has succeeded beyond belief, to the point that you begin to reach a point where a lot of Palestinian groups forsake terror and begin diplomatic discussions, because they've got a lot of voices who are listening to their side, favoring their side, arguing for their side, and now you have a different political dynamic in place. And again, I said, how do I say that this is an important historical event? Because it made changes like that, which make the situation in Palestine today much more complicated and emotionally volatile and explosive than it might have been had we not had this history and the consequences from that history. Again, it has changed the world. And again, that's my definition for an important historical event. Does it change history? This one did. And we can hate what they did, but they accomplished what their goal was, or one of their central goals, which was to make us talk about Palestine, to make us look at the suffering going on there, look at the injustices there, and we have looked, and it has divided the world even more than it was previously divided, or if not more intensely. Okay. I think that we kind of understand what happened there now. There's one other piece I would want to fit in, and this is to make the point that Black September wanted to make. Their plan to capture these Israeli athletes was titled Operation, and I'm going to mispronounce it, Ikrit and Bayram. And again, they're spelled differently depending on which translation you're looking at. Ikrit, the easiest one for me, is Ikrit, and Bayram is Biram. Those are two villages in 1948, Christian villages, within the boundaries, within the borders of 1948 Israel. So they are citizens of the state of Israel as Israel is born. What we know is that in 1948, when Israel was born, there was almost immediately 5 or 6 Arab nations who went to war with Israel. Israel went to the military came to these two villages and told them they had to leave the villages, that they needed to secure the place militarily, but that in 2 weeks they would be allowed back. They're still not back. They were never allowed back. And their lands were taken and farms were taken and all those kinds of things. And for Black September, they became the emblems of this is what the Israelis have done to, I don't know what the right word is. Indigenous is the wrong word, but people who were native to that land. They've tossed them off of their properties and usurped their land and power. And this is why we are doing what we are doing. This is the justification for what we are doing. Remember the people of Ikrit. Ikrit and Bayram had never taken up arms against Israel. They were Christians who were basically neutrals in the war, and they lost their place. They lost their villages. They lost their livelihood. They lost everything. And for Black September, that was calling this Operation Ikrit and Bayram was saying, here is our justification for why we are doing what we are doing and what the world needs to know. I mean, there's a quote from Harry S. Truman. It's one of my favorite quotes. He said, the only thing new in the world is the history we don't know. We don't know about a lot of that. That's one of the reasons for wanting to study the history of the Middle East from the 19th century up to 1948. It's because there's so much I don't know. There are so many things that we don't know. And maybe it's important that we do. I remember, I'm going off track here a little bit. I was talking earlier to Dominic. In 1978, when the Iran hostage crisis happened, I don't know how many people turned to me and said, what did we ever do to them? Why would they attack our embassy? And I needed to tell them, well, in 1953, they threw out a brutal dictator named the Shah of Iran, Pahlavi, and elected democratically a man named Mossadegh. And Mossadegh nationalized the oil fields, taking away British petroleum from the British. And the British said, this is not okay. And they worked with the Americans. The CIA led a coup, overthrowing Mossadegh and putting the Shah back in power. Because the Shah cooperated economically with the British and the Americans with their oil production. And we made lots and lots of money. Well, the people of Iran remembered that. And then in 1978, they overthrew the Shah again. And the Shah at this point was an old man dying of cancer. And Jimmy Carter, in what he meant as a humane act, said, "You can come to an American hospital. We'll take care of you until you die." And the people in Iran said, "They're doing it again. They are going to put the Shah back in power, and we are not going to stand for it." And my point isn't who's right and who's wrong in any of these things. It's that we need to know the history. There are grievances on all sides, and we don't know what those grievances are often. And so we do what most of us do. We cherry pick, and we pick the grievances that fit our narrative of the way we want to view history, and other people pick another set of cherry picking grievances and say, no, this is the real history. And the real history is an intertwining of the two and maybe some other threads that we're not even thinking about. And it is much more complex than we would want it to be. We want it to be a simple story of black and white, of right and wrong, and good guys and bad guys. And the world rarely works out that way. We hope it will, we dream it will, but it usually doesn't. And that really is the point here, I think. Okay, we know what happened. Now we need to get to what I think makes this story important, and that is the response to what happened. I mean, I could tell you of earthquakes that happened that killed literally thousands of Turks. We'll talk about it as a sad event, but we won't talk about it beyond that because the world didn't respond to it other than with some humanitarian aid. But we didn't think of it as something that, oops, I see somebody here. All right, someone new is coming in. Hopefully. Hi, Jackie. She's still, I'm going to let her connect first. Well, she went out again, so we'll see. Okay.
No, she's there.
I'm back.
All right. Very good. Very good, Jackie. We're talking about Munich, 1972, where 11 Israeli athletes were killed by a terrorist group, Palestinian terrorist group called Black September. And my thesis is that this is a very significant event, not for what happened in Munich, but for what followed. That this event will trigger the war on terror. And it is literally, it's an event that alters history. It's rare to say, there's an event where 11 people are killed and history has changed, but this is one of those. And so we have to pay attention to it. And my statement at the beginning was September 5th was the Munich Massacre. September 6th, the war on terror began. And for people who are younger than I am, the war on terror is one of the great realities of their lives. We have discussed already what happened in Munich and how it all went wrong. Now we're looking at what I think is, and I don't mean this harshly to the memory of those 11 people who died, but the more important part is, how did the world change? How did the world respond? And it is Israel who will set the tone for this. On September 6th, Golda Meir will call a meeting of her cabinet and of her national intelligence services. And they will make a couple of decisions. Let me just do something here. Get something available here. All right. One, they decided that there would be a shift in priorities for the intelligence services. I said this earlier. The intelligence services now will make their primary focus on terror. Prior to that, they had been spying on the Egyptians, on the Syrians, on their various Arab neighbors to see if they had war plans in the works. And Yom Kippur War, by the way, is right around the corner. So it's not like that everything ends in that direction. It doesn't, obviously. But Golda Meir and her cabinet and our national intelligence experts decided the graver threat to Israel was from terrorist groups. And 1972 had seen a huge upsurge in them. Any one of them could have been the trigger for that decisive change. Munich was the trigger. That's my thesis here. And so they basically said, we now know that terror is what needs to be followed, because what is happening is letter bombs are being sent through the mail and exploding in some embassy far, far away, whether in Europe or anywhere. One of them happens in Thailand. Israeli businessmen are being targeted and shot when they're traveling in Paris or Vienna or wherever they happen to be traveling. And that most of the gravest threats that Israel faced were not on Israel's own territory, but were when Israelis were outside of their homes, mostly in Europe, but not just in Europe. And that at this point, that had to be the focus. I mean, one of the things here was there was a failure of Israeli intelligence in terms of the Munich Massacre. Israeli intelligence had found out that there was a planned terrorist event to happen in Europe sometime in the late summer, in an event that would have millions upon millions of eyeballs and medias watching. And they never connected it to the Olympics. I mean, it's almost stunning to me, because if you were to say, what is the event where there will be an Israeli presence, a large Israeli presence, and the whole world is watching, and it's in Europe? 1, 2, 3, it hits all the marks. They never put it together. And again, Israel, I'm going to go off script here a little bit here. And Gary, maybe you know this, maybe you don't. David Elazar was the head of intelligence for Israel at this time. And we're getting into the period of the Yom Kippur War. Elazar, weeks ahead of time, was handed literally the war plans of Egypt and Syria. He had them. He read them. And he said, with a kind of arrogance, because Israel had been so successful in all the previous wars, it's nice on paper. They wouldn't dare do it because they know we'll wipe them up. And he never passed them up the line. Golda Meir found out about it later, after the Yom Kippur War. And she said nobody was to know this. She took the hit for that failure of intelligence. But David Elazar literally had Egypt's war plans in his hands, knew exactly what they were going to do, and said, they're not going to do it. And so Israeli intelligence, which has probably the highest reputation around the globe for its intelligence service, this is 2 cases in which they missed big time. And the odd thing is, they missed it having gotten a hold of the intelligence, and it's frustrating. I mean, if you want to go back to the 6-Day War, similarly, they got the war plans, and what they did was a preemptive strike. They took out, in the first day of the war, before the war really actually started, in a preemptive strike, they took out Egypt's Air Force. And once Egypt's Air Force was out of the way, it was a foregone conclusion that this war wasn't going to last long and that Egypt would win, because it was one Air Force against no. And so airplanes could support the ground forces. It was not, this doesn't sound right, it was not a fair fight. It was an overmatched fight. And failures, I mean, one of the things that we have learned through this event and through others is that intelligence gathering is one of the most important functions of a government, but it is not enough just to gather the information. You've got to interpret it correctly, understand what the potential occurrences could be out of that intelligence, and be prepared to combat that, either preemptively or to meet it when it happens. And again, if you said in 1972, what country does the best at intelligence gathering? Israel would be, if not at the top of the list, very near the top of that list. But in two cases, they screwed up, and they screwed up badly, and it cost. It was very costful. I don't know if costful is a word, but I just used it.
It's the same dialogue that's going on in Israel right now, with the fact that they missed
Yes.
October 7th. And in fact, one of the stories, it's kind of the undertone of what's going on in Israel right now, is that although they've had a major conflict every 5 to 8 years since they were founded, this is the first one that went on more than weeks.
Yes.
They always wrap it up fast. And what's going on in Israel right now is that, yeah, there are young men and women who are in battle for months on end, and their family life is destroyed. Their ability to support their family is out the window. Yeah, the economy's grinding to a halt. There's a lot of knockoff events that are occurring throughout Israel that, because of the war.
Kellyanne
And-
Conway had an expression about alternative facts. And the fact is, we live in a world with alternative facts. There are people promoting, and I have no knowledge that this has any truth to it. I'm putting that up front. This isn't history as I have seen and know it. But there are people who are saying Netanyahu had the information about October 7th and wanted it to happen because it then would trigger his ability to go after Hamas in a big way.
I heard that someone lower, way down the ladder, had the information, passed it up to her boss, and he didn't believe it, that it never went all the way up,
Okay.
but that someone knew about it.
So that story was that in the Wall Street Journal? It's recent. It came out about a week ago that there was a group of they were part of the armed force, part of the IDF. I think the entire group was women, young women, and they were not armed. Their role was to watch over the border.
Yes.
And they had witnessed the practice sessions that the terrorists were putting on,
Yes.
and they passed all this up and nothing happened.
Yep.
And
but getting at the truth of these kinds of stories is difficult. There are people who will tell you FDR knew about Pearl Harbor, but he wanted us in the war and he let it happen. I mean, again, that's not, one, I don't believe it, but two, even if it were believable, it's not proven at this point. And so, but I mean, that's one of the problems in a world that is so divided and in which we all have our alternative facts. We create a narrative that suits the truth that we want to follow, and keeps us forever divided because somebody else has their own set of alternative facts, and there you go.
One of the wonderful things about a generational conflict like what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now is that no matter what atrocity you point to, the people who suffered the tragedy can point to the one that last happened that went the other way.
Yeah.
Everybody's lost a father, a mother, an uncle, an aunt, a grandfather, and therefore they're fighting.
Yeah, no, and the whole purpose is to justify your position, and so this goes on, and there we go. All right, we're getting back to September 6th. Two key decisions were made. One, change in priorities. It's the war on terror. It's the war on terror. It's the war on terror. That's where we focus. And decision number two is something that Gary and Jean alluded to. They made a decision about the Munich Massacre, that the Israeli response had to be remorseless and had to be relentless. They would literally spend 20 years tracking down anybody who had any connections as an architect, as a supporter, as a participant, whatever it was, even if it was tangential, and putting them on a list. And a protocol was set up. This was called, by the way, Operation Wrath of God. And they were going to exert the wrath of God upon anybody who attempted a terrorist action against Israel. And they were going to begin very, very seriously with the Munich Massacre participants. And here was the protocol. Mossad was to identify anybody in the Palestinian organizations, whatever organization they were in, as a participant, and to make a viable case that their information was accurate. They would then, there was a group, subset of Mossad called Caesarea, and they formed assassination squads. The most important one, the most significant one, was led by a man named Mike Harari. And what they would do is they would then, Mossad had two roles. One, identify. Two, find out where they are. Then this assassination group would go and would spend weeks, if needed, following them, tracking them, seeing what their habits were, seeing what their patterns were, seeing where they were most vulnerable, at what time and in what place. And when they would construct what they saw as a viable plan, and they would take it to the prime minister. At this moment, it's Golda Meir, but that wrath of God protocol is still in place. And all they had to do was go to the prime minister, and the prime minister, he or she, would say yes or would say no. They didn't have to go through any other avenues. Once they had identified, created a plan, presented it to the prime minister, if the prime minister said yes, the assassination was on. And it's at least 13 people that they killed connected to the Munich Massacre. Now, there's a problem here, and I'm not even getting into a moral issue. One of the things that is clear in the war on terror, assassination is a viable tool, and we all use it. I think Obama had 563 drone attacks that he sent out. I don't know how many people died from the result of those things, but I can't think of a different word than assassinations for them. Again, you can justify them, you can deplore them. But based on intelligence, they decided these were dangers, and he would send drone attacks. So it's not only Israel is doing that. Assassination has become a viable tool in the war against terror, an important, a central tool, not just viable. But there's a problem. All of these assassinations took place on foreign soil. There is no government, no nation on earth which will say, come on in within our borders and take down your enemies. It's just not viable. It's not even thinkable. It wouldn't happen. Well, but they were really good. One of the things that Golda Meir said in setting this up is, when you come up with a plan, it has to be a plan in which our boys, that was her way of referring to them, our boys get out and nobody knows they were there. If it happens any other way, Israel will suffer for it, whether it's the arrest of our boys or whether it's the world condemning us for making an assassination attempt. So you got to get in and you got to get out, and nobody can have proof that you were there. I mean, the details of it, when they had a gun, if they were going to shoot somebody, the gun had a bag attached to it. So when you shot and the shell casing was ejected, it went right into the bag. It was detail after detail was covered. There would be no forensic, there would be no evidence. And you had the escape route planned out, the cars ready, the plane tickets ready, whatever it was, and you were out of the country before they even knew what happened. Well, the first assassination occurred in France, and there was no evidence, but France knew it was an Israeli operation. They knew by intuition, there was no other way to explain this. This was an Israeli operation. And they were right. And they were furious. But what actions could they take? Well, they did take action. In the PLO, Israel had a high-level informant who was giving them very useful information. France leaked his name. The informant disappeared. I assume he's dead. I assume he was killed. Don't know. He disappeared. And that was a very costly loss for the Israeli intelligence services. But again, that's the thing. If you're going to go, their assassinations were largely in Europe. If they had ever perpetrated an assassination within the borders of the United States, I don't know what our government would have done, but they would have been furious. And however they responded, whether they were behind the scenes responses or something, there would be an enormous response. You do not allow another nation to send a commando group into your country, just as Germany had refused to allow them to come in during the Munich Massacre. You do not allow another nation's military to fight their battle in your territory. Just does not happen, is not allowed.
And India just did that in Canada.
Canada. Yep.
And Canada is furious.
Yes.
Yes. Again, you do it and you hope you don't leave any tracks. But even when you don't leave tracks, depending on the victim, the first victim was one of the people involved in the planning of the Munich Massacre. 2 and 2 make 4. Israel was behind it. And again, France knew, and they made them pay. Okay. What happens is, and then this is not a surprise, during this 20-year period where they are after the Munich Massacre perpetrators, they began to widen the scope. We have evidence of a certain terrorist who has been involved in actions that have hurt Israel before. We know where he is. Let's put him on the list. He has nothing to do with Munich. I mean, the Wrath of God operation was about Munich. It wasn't about terrorism. It was about Munich. But not surprisingly, it broadened out, and they began to hit targets that had nothing to do with Munich. And again, what is the purpose of these assassination squads? It is, well, it's revenge, first off. Nobody says that. No government says that. You pretend that it's not revenge, but it's revenge. But the two things they will say, it's prevention and deterrence. Well, if there's a terrorist out there and you kill him, you prevented him from any further terrorist acts. And deterrence, you make other potential terrorists think twice, because if you take down one of ours, if you do something to an Israeli citizen, don't rest easy at night. Because whether we get to tomorrow or next year or in 20 years, the last one was 20 years in 1992, we're not going to forget. We're going to get you, and you are not going to sleep well at night. There's I'm just going to briefly mention this. During this period, post-Yom Kippur War, there's a period that's called the period of shadow wars, because really it was just terror wars. It was letter bombs being sent in the mail and exploding in an embassy. It's diplomats being attacked in Thailand, Israeli diplomats being attacked in Thailand. It's these kinds of events that are going on. It's hijacking of airplanes, all of these kinds of things. The height of these operations was a new operation called Operation Spring of Youth. Have you heard of that one, Gary?
No, I haven't.
Okay. This is the kingpin. They decided, well, Beirut is the gathering ground for basically the PLO and all the refugees and the terrorist groups. And that is where the terrorists feel most safe. You can get us elsewhere. You can't get us here. Well, there was a meeting being held, and it involved 3 of the top level PLO leaders, not Arafat, but 3 of the top. And Mike Harari said, we got to get them. In Beirut, with all the security in the world that they have. And while we're at it, they have some munitions and demolition factories. We want to take them down. We'll blow them up. This is an unbelievably large-scale operation. And if you asked anybody, an impossible one. And they pulled it off. They got all 3 of the leaders and they blew up the factories. And they got out.
Familiar with it.
This is one of those moments where it's kind of a headiness for the Israeli intelligence services and Mossad and Caesarea and the assassination squads, we're good. But it was also the Palestinians saying, God, they're good. And you see an immediate drop-off, a significant drop-off on terror attacks, because they're thinking, there's nowhere we can go where we're safe. This is, they got us in Beirut. They got us in our own headquarters. How in the hell did they do that? And so there is in the Middle East in general, from the Six-Day War on, there was a kind of growing belief in the Israelis are invincible. They're infallible. If they want to do it, they can do it. And there's very little we can do about it. I think that was part of the reason for Mark Elazar's failure to pass up the information on the Yom Kippur War. We're just too damn good. They don't have the chutzpah to try and go after us. They know what'll happen. We'll spank them. And they know, yes, I thought that would be an appropriate choice. So Operation Spring of Youth, if you want to talk about an event that had a large impact of all the assassinations, well, this is the one that did it because it quieted terrorism against Israel for a significant period of time, because most of the terrorists were more concerned with what do I need to do to protect myself than planning and executing the next operation. But with success comes arrogance, and Israel's going to make their first big mistake. Mike Harari had in his head that the terrorist, public enemy number one, the one that he wanted from the beginning more than any other, was a man named Salome. And he wanted to get this guy. And they couldn't get this guy, and they couldn't find this guy. And it was such a problem. And I mean, I talked earlier about how careful they were. The minute they got a hint of where he might be, they weren't careful. They wanted this guy too badly. So there was, it was in Oslo. And one of the Israeli agents there, a low-level one, saw a guy. He said, I think it's Salome. And he was talking to a Palestinian. And he was asked, are you sure it's him? Looks like him. I think it's him. I think we already know it's not him. And they got to go ahead. They never investigated further. They didn't send up a team to verify. They went up. He was pointed out to them. He was walking along the street with his 6 months pregnant wife, and he was shot dead. And it was the wrong guy. He was a waiter who worked part-time in a swimming pool. And he was in a pool where a Palestinian was, and since they spoke the same language, they were talking. But there was intense political blowback for Israel. Many states were branding Israel as a state that used state-sponsored terror. The reputation of Mossad was hammered with this. And, surprisingly, I don't think in any other case we can say where they hit the wrong guy, but they hit the wrong guy. And here's what the problem is. The perpetrators, the assassins, they were out. They got out of Oslo in a second. But the lower level people who had been setting things up, they didn't. And these weren't pros. A lot of these people were part-time workers for Mossad. They had their job, but they were useful sometimes, and they could be employed in some operation in some minor role. They all got arrested. And again, they weren't these top-level Mossad officials. They talked. They're scared people. Israel's reputation was taken through the mud over this. Now, 5 years later, they will get Salome. But this was a mistake that mattered. And again, in our world of we cherry pick our facts and you cherry pick your facts, the assassination of this waiter right in front of his 6-month pregnant wife. That's one of the facts we're going to cherry pick. And it was used very heavily in lots of narratives used to criticize Israel and Israeli policies. Again, we live in a world, and we know this, in which each side will cherry pick. We will find what supports what we need to say, what our narrative is. And both sides are guilty of horrible things. All we got to do is say, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. We're justified in doing what we do. And so that was one that hurt them very, very badly. Okay. And I think, again, what they also then have a shot at getting Arafat. And they got the hots to get Arafat too.
Oh, yeah.
Arafat but he's a big public figure. He got saved in one of the this was after Salome. And he was supposed to be at this location. Someone said, we've spotted him. And Mossad said, no. We want to verify. So they were using technology, sort of like the Google search, where you can literally zoom in on an area and you can look at it. It was a cloudy day. And the technician said, we can't see anything. Could be him, might not be him. We can't see anything. It was him. And he escaped his getting hit. All right.
Mike.
Yeah.
I got to tell you a quick Arafat story. Very, very true and close to home. For 20 years, I worked for Cushman and Wakefield, real estate services. And we managed a large portfolio for a Jewish family in the DC area named the Gewirtzes. And the woman who was the asset manager for all of these high-end properties was a bit of a loose cannon, and she took it upon herself to lock out a tenant one day who had stopped paying rent. They would pay for 3 months and not pay for 6 months and then pay for 9 months. And in DC, you have the right, when a commercial tenant goes 10 days late, to file a notice to quit and lock them out. And they did. And it turned out, and the backstory is that while that was happening, Israel was lobbing bombs into Arafat's compound, which you should remember that period of time.
Yes.
It turned out that the office that they locked out was the lobbying arm of the PLO in Washington, D.C. Al Jazeera picked up the news and ran a banner headline the next morning. And we had death threats up and down the country into all of our offices because we were in the headline.
Yes.
Cushman and Wakefield and this Jewish family locks out the PLO at this critical time when they
Right.
needed to be lobbying. It was a strange event. We were locked down for about a week.
Yeah, and that story can be repeated 1,000 times. All right. Essentially, I think I've said the things that I wanted to say. What I wanted to say is I was surprised. I almost regretted choosing this event because I thought it's a tragic story and I could tell it and we could all feel bad and could all say terrorism is terrible and anti-Semitism is terrible. But we're not saying anything original. These are thoughts we don't need a history forum to bring to the fore. Was it an event that had historical significance that affected this whole project of looking through the history of my lifetime is to say, how has the world I live in been affected and changed by these events? And ultimately, when I was beginning to research, I was saying, I don't think I've been affected by this. And then I realized with the September 6th meeting, it's never the event that matters. It's what follows after it. And after it, Israel first began the war on terror, but the whole world became involved and wrapped up in the war on terror. And for the generations younger than I am, the war on terror is one of the most significant realities there. Again, I repeat, tragedy does not make an event important. Tragedy makes it sad. An event is important if it changes our world, if it changes the course of history. I feel awful for the people who died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The event has implications even larger than those deaths. It changed the world that we live in. It changed our priorities. It changed the nature of our fears. It changed so much about who we are and how we behave. It just had a fundamental change in every aspect of our lives and our cultures. This one it's not as large as the atomic bomb, but this one had significant changes. And if you want to talk about the history of the Middle East, it's one of the most important changes affecting that whole struggle. At this point, if anybody wants to jump in and make some comments or say whatever it is they want to say, I think I have said what I intended to say. If not,
I'll give you one
yeah.
thing you'll find entertaining. You guys know who the comedian Dennis Miller is?
Yes.
Google Dennis Miller's rant on the Middle East. I promise you, you will be laughing like crazy.
Okay. Next month, we're doing Jimmy Carter's Melez speech. And it's one of the most important presidential speeches ever given. It lost him the election, I think, almost more than any other factor. Well, the hostage crisis with that too. And it opened the door for the Reagan Revolution. And what the Melez speech is really about is America had enjoyed a thriving, growing economy from World War II on to right around the 1970s, early 1970s. That's when we began to hit by inflation, by recession, by stagflation. That's when the oil embargo happened and oil prices quadrupled in almost immediately. And our economy was sinking because of it. And Americans began, in the words of Jimmy Carter's speech, to lose faith, to be afraid of the future, to lose that confidence that had been part of the definition of what it meant to be an American. One of the realities is we were so successful economically because oil was cheap. And one of the things we learned is when you take away cheap oil, a modern economy is in trouble. I don't care who it is. I don't care how large the economy is. We had the cheapest, we still do have the cheapest oil on the planet, but it ain't as cheap as it used to be. And as its percentage of our costs involved in doing business, whether it's the military cannot run without oil. Why did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? Because they had no oil and they needed a protected route to oil. And the only threat to that route was the US Navy. So they preemptively took out Pearl Harbor, thinking if we sink the US Navy, then our oil route is protected and we can be the great power. We can be a superpower. The United States is blessed with plenty of oil. And again, we had an economy that just grew and grew and grew for a period that is almost unthinkable, for 30 years. But when the economy began to sink and Vietnam had taken so much of a toll on our belief in our military capacity to just go in and win a war. Who are the Vietnamese? It's a small rinky-dink country. We can take them on. And we couldn't. We lost that war. And, we don't like to use that term. We negotiated our way out of it, but we lost that war. So we lost Vietnam, expended a whole lot of lives and money on it. Our economy was going in the tank. Recessions were happening, and people were afraid of the future in a way that post-World War II American generations hadn't been. And Jimmy Carter decided to address that feeling and say, look, I know how you're feeling. I know what your concerns are, but we still are the greatest nation on earth, and we can do all these things, and we can right this ship and all of that. But you first have to get over feeling this malaise. Well, Ronald Reagan used that speech against him, saying he doesn't believe in the American people. He talks about malaise. I talk about this is we're still on the path upward. America is a growing, prosperous nation who will in the future be only more prosperous and grow even greater and more powerful. I am the spirit of optimism. And Jimmy Carter became the spirit of malaise, the spirit of failure. And when the hostage crisis happens, he can't even get the hostages out. How could this rabble group of Iranians keep us, was it 400 days, 480 days, something like that?
Yeah.
They kept our
Like
hostages held. How could they do that to us? And it was a period where Jimmy Carter's speech was either going to say to people, look, we can get past this and we'll be okay later. Or it was going to make people feel like, oh my God, we're in trouble. And they looked at Jimmy Carter as not the person who could lead them out. And they looked to Ronald Reagan as the man who could. And when I said important events in history are events that change the direction of history, going from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan is a change in the direction of American history. And we still live with, good or bad, however you view it, the consequences of that change in electoral politics. And so there's a lot more to say about that, just giving you kind of a précis of the kinds of things that we will be talking about. And December, we don't meet, and then we'll meet again in January. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank
All
you,
right,
Michael.
Thank you. I thank you all.
There.
Amen.
See you
All right.
all.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Take care,
Stay
guys.
healthy.
All right. I'm going to lock you all out.
All right, Michael.
All right.
There.
Bye.